Good morning, everybody. Will you confirm a couple of things for me? Will you confirm that first of all, that you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I see people nodding. And are you seeing a page that says Utah Department of Human Resource Management?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, let me just introduce myself. Our main introducer, if that's actually a thing, internet is down. And so I get the real privilege of introducing myself. My name is Dan Chase, and I'll be walking us through our discussion today on employee engagement. A couple of things. This session is being recorded, and that's we kind of have to tell you that so that we're allowed to do it. But it's recorded so that you can watch it later. We're going to go through a lot of information, and we will be sending you out afterwards an evaluation as well as a recording. On top of that, we're also going to send you a link that you see right here to all the other off-the-shelf training opportunities that we've provided. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? When I say we have a lot to get to, I really mean that. Okay, we're talking about employee engagement, the essence and end goal of organizational leadership. I'll explain that title, but even before I do that, let me just share one thing with you. I want to get this out of the way. I'm excited to announce that 2 weeks from today, you've got another webinar opportunity, another off-the-shelf series opportunity called Winning Loyal Customers. We've got Kevin Miller coming in, who's got extensive experience with a variety of organizations, including Franklin Covey. But he's going to be sharing, you can see some of the objectives there, but he's going to be sharing some things that are, I think, specifically useful for us in the public sector. So get that, you'll be getting a link to that. Some of you have already gotten it. We'll send that out again statewide, but make sure you get signed up for that, 10 to 11, Kevin Miller next week. So employee engagement. Now, let me tell you what we're going to talk about. The reason I say that this is a big topic and that we've got a lot to get to, it's quite a bold statement to say that something is the essence and the end goal of organizational leadership. That's kind of saying something. But as I think about employee engagement, maybe with only a couple of exceptions, everything that we've done in this off-the-shelf series has been with employee engagement as the end in mind. That's really what we're trying to accomplish. And if you think about it for a second, and we'll define employee engagement here in a second, but if you think about it, if you are a manager, supervisor, director, whatever, if you have engaged employees, you are being a leader. Okay. And quite frankly, for lack of a better term, you win. If you've got engagement from your employees, that's it. That is the end goal. Your organization is really now in a position to be successful. Okay. So you've seen these objectives when you signed up for the course originally. Here are a few things that we'll talk about. We want to define what engagement is. We'll talk about why it's so critical. We'll look at some of the data on why engagement is something that you and I should be striving for regardless of our position. We'll talk about what leaders and managers do to help their employees become engaged. And then let's talk about this specifically as it relates to the public sector and maybe some of the current conditions that we find ourselves in. So probably the most widespread definition, if you look at the literature of what engagement is this from a couple of scholars, Kotz and Kahn, have done a couple of things together, but as far back as 1990, right? I won't read that definition to you, but it's this idea that we are bringing our whole selves to a job, to a role, that it's part of our core identity. And so when we have really engaged employees, they're bringing everything that they have to the workspace. Now, the reason I want to reference Kahn and that he is found so often in the literature is because, if I'm going to be honest with you for a second, employee engagement is really popular and really common from consulting firms. In the academic literature, there are some problems with it because they say, actually, it's not that well defined. They say, sometimes people say engagement, but they're really talking about job satisfaction. And sometimes they say employee engagement, but they're really talking about person and organization fit. So we want to get down to the nitty gritty here and say, okay, what do we mean by it as employees in the state of Utah? What do we think it is? Okay, so What's interesting is one of the ways that it is often defined is in opposition or in contrast to burnout. So there's a lot of literature, a lot of studies being done on organizational burnout. And by the way, unsurprisingly, a lot of burnout right now. Okay, so burnout, when employees are feeling burnout, they're exhausted. Their cynicism is increased, right? There's always some degree of cynicism in organizations, I suppose, but it's magnified. And then they're ineffective at their jobs. And so engagement, if we want to help define this, would be the opposite of that. People have high energy. They're fully involved in their job. They're resilient as opposed to cynical, and they're effective in their work. Okay. One more definition here from Robert Lavinia. Engaged employees have a heightened connection to work, the organization, the mission, or coworkers. I would rather say and coworkers. But they find personal meaning and pride in their work, and they believe that their organizations value them in return. Now, this is critical because we're going to talk about, well, what is it that organizations have to do to engage employees, right? There's something that they expect. And the other phrase I want you to notice in this quote is this: they go above and beyond. They expend discretionary effort. This is a term that I've used for a long time now. The truth is, and this will seem like it's cynical, but none of us are operating at maximum capacity right now. Now, don't get me wrong. That's not to say that you aren't crazy busy, but there is always more that you and I can give. And when employees are engaged, they want to. They're not feeling forced to. They want to give effort, discretionary effort that goes above and beyond the minimum requirement. Okay. So these are some early definitions for employee engagement, but I want to add something here a little bit more. Employee engagement is more than motivation. So motivation is direction, intensity, or persistence towards a goal. In this case, towards organizational goals. And you and I, we always say we want motivated employees. Well, yes, but we want to qualify that. We want motivated employees who are motivated towards the goals the organization has. I don't want them motivated to burn the place down, to use an extreme example. But also, motivation by itself is not enough. And that's why we want to expand our definition. A lot of times people just say, oh, motivated employees are engaged employees. Not necessarily so. I might be really motivated and give a lot to a job, but I do it for 6 months. We also want committed employees. Motivation plus commitment, the degree to which I intend to stay with an organization. Now we're getting at a more realistic definition of employee engagement. So I'm going to throw a lot of things out you here, but at a minimum, if you take nothing else away from our conversation today, I want you to say, okay, it's motivation, commitment, those two things together. If I've got both of those, I'm likely to get engagement or to be engaged as an employee. Okay. So what's happening in the world today? Are we an engaged workforce? Well, Gallup, who we'll talk a lot about today, probably does the most polling on engagement. And they say, by the way, this is higher than it's been in a long time. Right now, in the U.S., this is U.S. only, and we are much higher than the rest of the world, by the way. Only 36% are motivated and committed to their jobs. Normally, you see this 29%, 30%, but their latest poll is 36%. This means employees are feeling that the concept that many of you have heard of called flow, where you do a job and you're so engrossed in it that you don't even realize time is passing, that kind of a thing. They are proud of their organizational identities, things like that. Well, on the other end of the spectrum, 13% are actively disengaged. This is also lower than we normally see. This is not just people who don't like their jobs or something. These are people that are actively trying to, whether they're open about it or not, they're resisting. They're trying to make things worse where they work. Sometimes there's theft involved with that, right? Sometimes there's discrimination and workplace harassment involved with that. You'll notice here one of the keys to this is unhealthy resistance. I say that because not all resistance is unhealthy. We have a lot of changes. We have a lot of changes in the state of Utah right now. Just because people are resisting change doesn't mean they're actively disengaged. And it's when they do it automatically, okay, that it's unhealthy resistance, or they're doing it in a way that's trying to tear others down. Unhealthy, disengaged employees are often contagious, and that's scary to us. And often, again, we see workplace deviant behaviors. what just happened there? Gossip, things of that nature. Hold on, I don't know why my slides just went away. Are we back?
You're back.
And there we go. Okay, so now the middle group. Can you all see that? 51%. This is where the work is to be done. Look, the 13%, the actively disengaged, those are like, nope, I hate my job, forget this place, but I'm not leaving. I'm going to tear it down and collect a paycheck in the meantime. So, in a really sort of negative sense, those are hard to recoup. But the 51%, and I don't know what the numbers are exactly for the state. I think that's an interesting discussion. But these are people, by the way, that if you're a manager of them, some of you right now are saying, please, I would take that. These are people that are doing their job, doing the things that are asked of them, but very little else. So they're not dissatisfied with their work, but they're not engaged either. They're compliant. They're like, yeah, tell me what to do and I'll do it, but I'm not going to do anything more. I'm not going to bring anything else to the job. Now, here's the key part. This 51% is where you and I as leaders in the state of Utah, assuming that our numbers are anywhere similar to the rest of the United States, this is where our work is to be done. Can we move this 51% to the engaged category? That's what's really critical here. And then, of course, just quickly here, I won't go through each of these specifically, but why should we care? Look, this is a study, it was published back in 2011 in Fortune magazine, but you just see there that in the private sector, if we're going to look at that, profits are better for companies that have engaged employees, right? They just are. Well, what about government? Look on the right side here from the MSPB, the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board. When they did their study this is federal agencies, by the way. What did they find? If there was, when employees reported that they were engaged and managers reported that their employees were engaged, higher scores on agency program results. Right there, to me, that would be enough. That would be enough of an argument that employee engagement matters. But less turnover, fewer discrimination, fewer sick days, right? Which I find kind of funny. Here's the disconcerting part from the nonprofit Best Places to Work. A highly engaged and motivated workforce drives productivity and service quality, but the government lacks well behind the private sector in employee engagement, and the gap is growing. This is from 2019. This should be disconcerting to all of us, okay? So here's our process. Here's how employee engagement happens. You see employee engagement, motivation, and commitment in the middle there. Well, what do you get? What is it? So we know that you get motivation and commitment, but what does that actually look like? And we know that you get good organizational outcomes. We just saw that from the previous slides. Well, it looks like, as Robert Levine said, you get discretionary effort. You get effort. I'm going to try even when things are difficult. I'm going to try even when it's not asked of me. You get what are called organizational citizenship behaviors, meaning you get people that are good teammates. They're there to support one another. They're there to encourage one another. Like we want good citizens in our societies and in our towns. These are good members of your organizations that are like, oh, I'm gonna clean this mess up because it needs to be cleaned, and I'm a good citizen of this organization, right? To be very specific. You tend to get higher creativity from people that find solutions around problems. And then you get, and I think this is critical for what we're going right now with going through with a new administration. I call it a benefit of the doubt. What I mean by that is when something happens, and it happens all the time, but when something happens in an organization where they're like, whoa, why are we doing this change? Engaged employers are the ones that are willing to say, okay, that's all right. I'm not gonna cry about this. I'm not gonna complain about this. Let's just see how this goes, right? So there's that kind of resilience that comes from and that latitude that organizational members, when they're engaged, that they give the organization. Right, when that change happens, when benefits get cut, when there isn't a pay raise, when whatever else it might be. And then finally, when you have engaged employees, how critical is this? You get organic recruiters. You get people that say, you know where you need to come work. You need to come work for DWS or UDOT or Department of Health or Environmental Quality or Wildlife Services or whatever it is, right? You get people saying that because they are so engrossed in their work and love where they work that now they go out and naturally try and find talented people. But what we want to focus on here is on the left column. Here are the things that we're going to spend our time talking about: organizational justice, perceived organizational support. Do you have friends at work? job characteristics, and organizational pride and purpose. The research says, and I would guess your experience as well as mine says, when these things are present, then that's when we start to get motivated employees. Okay. Now I want to say one more thing here. I've got a couple people that I'm going to ask to participate here. Jennifer, if you're on here, we've been talking about employee engagement for a bit. First of all, Jennifer, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Jennifer, too.
Good morning.
Jennifer Thronson, sorry. The Jennifer that, no, yeah, I suppose we probably have 5 Jennifers on here that are
Right.
panicking right now. No, Jennifer Thronson, Dr. Jennifer Thronson, do you have anything to add to what we've talked about so far? How have you seen engagement play out? I think you're over teaching and learning, the director over teaching and learning, if I have that title right. What are your thoughts on engagement? How have you seen it play out on your teams? Any thoughts that you can share with us?
Yeah, just looking at that left-hand column with friends, when we did a survey last January and said, like, what do you like most about the workplace? That was that I have colleagues that I really enjoy came up number one with, it was just an open response category. That does seem to be a huge factor in employee engagement, that you like who you work with. You spend a lot of time with those people. And so that has been huge for our organization, and really that engagement process. And then I'm just kind of looking at some of those pieces, that organizational support. That's something that we really strive to support our teams, and saying, let us know what tools, resources, professional learning that you need to be able to do your job the best that you can. And we will find the financial time or people resources to help you develop those skills. Our staff feels supported and able to continue in their development, knowing that, we have high expectations for their work and their professionalism, but we don't just have expectations, we also have the supports in place to do that. And I think that makes a huge difference. It's great to have high expectations, but if you don't have the willingness to support people in achieving those expectations, that leaves kind of a disenfranchised employee. So I can totally relate to a lot of these topics. I don't know how much you want from me. I can speak all day, Dan. So.
Well, and the people I've asked to participate, I know that they can speak to this and they do this well. And that's partly why I've asked them to contribute here. I love what you just said. 2 things. I love what you just said about the high expectations plus the support. Supporting people is not, well, here, let me make it as easy as I can for you. It is helping them know, in consultation with them. No, I'm going to make you stretch, and I'm going to bring out the best in you, but I'm going to give you everything I have to help you achieve it. And that is so inherently rewarding to people. I think. Can I ask you though? I want to go back to this friends thing. What would you say to people that say? Because I think we might have some people listening here who say, "Yeah, but we don't have time. We don't have time." So that's great that all your people get along. I don't have time to make these people be friends. And of course we can't force people to be best friends. What can you speak to maybe is it worth it to invest in team building opportunities? I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but will you speak more to kind of that building friendships at work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a few structures in place to facilitate that, where you don't feel like I'm only doing this for the sake of friendship.
Mm-hmm.
But we have things like team meetings on a bi-weekly basis, so every 2 weeks for our teams, that are smaller groups that work on similar topics and areas. But in those team meetings, there's times to share some personal things, as well as what are you working on? How can we collaborate or connect? How does our work overlap? They'll share, like we have one team that has an opening and closing act, and one person will play the accordion because they have that talent, and the other one sends them off with a quick puppet show. Like, we have some very interesting skill sets. You wouldn't know these things about people if you didn't have kind of facilitate these opportunities to share. So, and then we have like a peer-to-peer nomination process, where if somebody really went out of their way to support you as a teammate, you recognize them through this process, and that potentially earns them OA, that they get to take a little time off because of their willingness to support somebody else or some exceptional work that they did. And that peer-to-peer process, part of it's us getting more strategic in getting those done, because all of us think, oh, that person was so helpful, but taking the time to actually write those notes and send them in for consideration of that time off is something we've had to be a little more intentional about. Like, I schedule it on my calendar to make sure it happens. Otherwise, I have all these great thank yous in my head, but they don't actually get written and sent to anyone. So we've kind of just instituted pieces like that, and then we have like a birthday announcement when people have birthdays, just things that let people connect. And it's not, because I'm the same way. I'm too busy to even that, like, 5 minutes around the water cooler. I'm like, I just don't get water.
Yeah.
But it's finding
You've been
those
dehydrated for years.
yeah,
right?
and more the
Yeah.
structures that we built in to facilitate kind of that natural creation of that, and then that kind of builds further outside of those team meetings and structures that we have.
That is awesome. So I love that, and I want you to remember. First of all, thank you. That intentionality. So I would guess most of people on this webinar, their organizations have some sort of peer-to-peer thing, but most people have it and do nothing with it. And so the fact that you say, no, we've got to be more intentional about this, we've got to model this, actually calendaring, I've got to do these things. And I would say, supervisors listening, are you talking to your employees about, hey, have you filled out any peer-to-peer things in the past month or something? I think that's an important conversation to have. And then I want you guys to remember when Jennifer brought up this idea of being something personal, right? And the vulnerability of playing the accordion, or a puppet show in front of your peers, right? We'll talk about that. Jennifer, thank you. That is perfect.
Just one more that came to mind is our
Please.
recess. We have recess time. With COVID, we really lost connectivity with each other. And so when our kids were at home, they were having virtual recess, and it gave us the idea of why don't we have virtual recess? So once a week, many of our teams meet for 30 minutes and just kind of shoot the breeze about like, what are you doing this weekend? Or what's going on in your personal life. It always leads to some work conversations, but yeah, it is really just this, if you want to come, there's this 30 minutes, you can come and enjoy each other's company. And that's kept some of that camaraderie that I think we would have lost. And we had a lot of staff transition. We've had some new team members that we've added come on, and being able to weave them into the fold without being together, it's been a useful strategy too. So that would just be another one, and I will be quiet now, I promise.
No, that is awesome. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of these, what does this mean during COVID, right? A lot of these concepts are the same, but I love that idea of recess. Now, look, I hadn't planned on talking about this, but let me just say quickly, everybody, some of you right now are saying, yeah, but we've got so-and-so, we've got this person or that person will be like, they'd never come. That's fine. You don't say, you better be at recess, or you're in trouble, right? You don't do that. But making that kind of thing, I'm telling you, if you give these kinds of fun opportunities, integrity, and opportunities to get to know each other, it pays dividends. The other thing I'll say is really quickly about the friends thing at work, and we will talk about this a little more in depth, what the literature says, but if in a meeting, don't be afraid of personal conversation. Don't be like, oh my gosh, guys, come on, we got to get down to the agenda. If people are having a natural, organic conversation about their weekend, I've had a leader who's like, oh, okay, we got to move on. Like they were almost like visibly uncomfortable because there were inside jokes or other things. It's like, no, that needs to happen. We need that, right? And if it's not happening, structure a recess where there is that kind of opportunity. You'll see, I think it's good that it inevitably leads to work conversations, because that's kind of what you're hoping for. That means it's happening organically. Right. Anyway, thank you, Jennifer. That's fantastic. So, by the way, guys, so here's our model. We're going to be looking at this quite a bit. But what is this all? What does this all matter? By the way, I'm sorry, I've got an affinity for 80s TV shows from when I was a kid. But so what really matters here? The truth is, so you guys know Alyssa Milano, Tony Danza, the show Who's the Boss, right? As it turns out, if I go back to our model here, and you notice the left there, these are the things that that tend to lead to employee engagement, motivation, and commitment. This question is really the one that matters, as it turns out. So look at this. This is from McKinsey. These numbers here on the left. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but 56% of American workers claim that their boss is mildly or highly toxic. How about that? Okay, how about that? 75% of Americans say that their boss is the most stressful part of their workday. 75%. Now, in one sense, I would say, well, look, if your boss is the one that's kind of like holding you accountable, then maybe they should be the most stressful part. But I'm not sure that's the role of a boss or manager. The goals and tasks should be in front of you, and then they should be the ones easing the stress about those tasks. And you see there a book. When I've done webinars before, I've showed you this book. It's The Manager. And again, I told you, we're going to hear a lot from Gallup. This is in not that we're in airports a lot anymore, but it's an airport bookstore book, right? But basically, they said that you can see it's kind of a plain title, but the idea is that This is what matters. If you want to get engagement and move your organizations forward, it does not happen without the people who are managing others, from frontline up to director level, up to the C-suite. How effective are your people at managing others? And that's sometimes management is an unsexy term. We like leadership, right? But again, if you're a manager who's getting engagement, you're a leader. Okay, you were a leader. So what did they find in that It's the Manager book? You have probably heard this stat before now, but look at this. They said Gallup has been doing this for 100 years now, these kind of employee surveys and polls. They say the most profound, distinct, and clarifying finding they've ever for Gallup is that 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. 70%. Now, there are other factors, there are other variables, of course, but that management, the effectiveness of management, according to Gallup, is what matters most. So I think if we look at our engagement, employee engagement process again, I would say that the manager here is what we might call a moderating variable, meaning all these things on the left, from organizational justice down to pride and purpose, matter, but it depends on, it's almost always filtered for the employee through the manager. So how well is the manager facilitating these things, or how well is the manager allowing these concepts or principles to reach the employee? It's absolutely critical, right? So again, let me talk about these first three. We're going to talk about these quickly, and I know some of you say, hey, we went through that too quickly. Remember, this is recorded, and there's an opportunity for you to review this again, or we can just chat about it offline. But I want to talk about org justice, perceived organizational support, and friends. Okay, so what do we mean by organizational justice? Well, yeah, I think it's useful for you as leaders in your organizations to know this language. There are three components, generally speaking, to organizational justice, and if we're going to talk about it generally, it just means, do people think that the way rewards are distributed in your organization are fair? And by rewards, I don't just mean salary, although that's a part of it. The way that schedules are determined, is it fair? The way that days off are determined, is that fair? The way that promotions happen in your organization, is that fair? So distributive justice is simply the outcomes. Is this all equitable to people? Is this do people get what they deserve, so to speak? Procedural justice is, do I know the process by which I determine if I get a raise or not, or if I'm worthy of a promotion or not, or if I get the time off or not, that sort of thing. Are the procedures by which this happens fair? And by the way, in this day and age, are we aware of our implicit biases as managers, as part of those procedures? Okay. And then finally, interactional justice is simply, am I treated fairly? Am I treated well? If people feel that your organization is unjust, now keep in mind, I might not get a raise, distributive justice, but if I know that it was fair because I didn't do jack squat this year, I could still be engaged in my work. Okay. Or I'm not going to pout, or I'm not going to be disengaged, because I'm like, well, yeah, it's fair. And I know why it was determined that way. Okay. And my boss treated me very well and explained to me why I didn't get that promotion, and another internal candidate did. There can still be I might be unhappy about the decision, but it might not lead me to be disengaged. Now, perceived organizational support. Jennifer talked about this a little bit. It's a super critical concept with a really unfortunate acronym. So every time that I bring this up to people, I'm like, hey, we need to talk about POS, right? And you can imagine the laughter and the derision I get. But basically, it's this. Jennifer talked about this a little bit too. Do I feel like the organization has my back? Do they care about me as a person and a complete person, or am I just a resource to them? Are they just trying to get out as much out of me as possible, regardless of what's happening in my life? I can tell you, I've had a couple experiences where I've had major, major, major health problems. And my wife was working for the Department of Workforce Services at the time, and I was working for the DHRM. And of course, it meant a lot of time off, including time off I no longer had because I had used it so much. And the way my wife was treated in terms of the flexibility with her schedule at DWS, and the way I was treated by my own agency, there is no question we felt supported in this massive, massive, difficult time in our lives. And what does that engender from us? You better believe we felt committed to our organizations based on how we felt, both from the overall organization as well as our direct supervisors in those circumstances. Okay. And finally, that third thing, I really appreciate Jennifer talking about this. It's social networks, it's friendships at work. You guys, this is a massive difference maker for people at work. Here's the interesting thing. As Jennifer pointed out, you can actually facilitate the circumstances that are more likely to enhance positive, friendly relationships at work. You cannot force people to be best friends. But what do we know about the science, the psychology of friendship? Proximity matters. And Jennifer talked about some of the ways you do that, even in a COVID, even in a pandemic circumstance, how you create some of that proximity. Familiarity. There's interesting studies on the more frequently we interact with people, the more likely we are to be friends with them. And what's interesting is my team during the pandemic, the early parts of the pandemic, we were spending sometimes 12-hour days together as we were trying to get contact tracing training together, things like that. And I think that familiarity was really good for our team, that kind of familiarity. The second thing is similarity. I mean, quite frankly, if we have things in common with people, we're more likely to be friends with them. Now, the truth is, you don't know that you have things so much in common with people unless there are those opportunities to share who we are as a person that Jennifer talked about. Then you find out, oh my gosh, like, yeah, maybe we don't like the same, maybe we don't have the same hobbies, but we have the same angst about our teenage kids that we can connect on, or we're both from the East Coast and we can talk about how different the East Coast is compared to our life here in Utah, or, whatever else it is. But you've got to have those opportunities to find out about people for similarity. And then finally, the key one is that vulnerability. In fact, the kind of the cliche is that you go from friendly acquaintances to true friends once there's vulnerability that is honored. And what I mean by that is, once I feel that I can confide in you and I am not punished for that, I'm not betrayed, I'm not mocked, and you confide something in me, and it's like, oh yeah, we can trust each other, then there's vulnerability, then there's real solid friendship. Okay. And it sounds to me like some of the ideas that Jennifer gave us really promote a lot of these opportunities. I hope you were listening to that. Okay, but there it is, you guys. There's 3 of the 5 right there of the employee engagement process. Now I know we went through those quickly, but I would encourage you. I mean, do a simple Google search of organizational justice, and you'll be like, okay, now I can start assessing my team or organization. Do people think it's just? A simple Google search, perceived organizational support. How are we doing with that? Can I talk to my team about that? Do they feel like the organization has their back? What are the narratives? What are the examples that I could say, oh, here was a time where Steve, the organization, as a Steve supervisor, I think I got his back. Or here's a time where my boss really got mine. And I'm using that colloquial phrase, right, have my back, but I think you know what I mean by that. Do they care about me? Do they support me? Okay. And then finally, are there opportunities for the development of friendly relationships? Friendships, if that's not too strong of a word. Are you promoting those opportunities, even during COVID? Okay, even during COVID. We know in this day and age that technology does not prohibit us from developing relationships, right? In fact, increasingly, COVID or not, that's how relationships are being formed in some cases, okay? So please Google those if you have any questions, or reach out if you have any questions about those, okay? So there's our justice, support, and friends that lead to motivation and commitment, right? And again, always filtered primarily through the manager, as Gallup and experience tells us is the case. But we need to talk about the next 2. Job characteristics and organizational pride. Now, job characteristics is a heavy concept that I went back and forth, you guys. I didn't know. Honestly, I was like, do I introduce this or not? But it is so empirically valid and so evidence-based that I felt like it would be irresponsible for me not to bring it up. I don't know that it's the sexiest topic, but and some of you will say, I can't form my job, I can't change the way my job is. Or even you supervisors, managers, and directors say, look, those are great that these characteristics tend to lead to engagement, but I can't do anything about that. So I'd invite you to understand this concept, and I would invite you to think about, even in the small ways that you can shape the characteristics of the jobs that your people have, so that they're more inherently engaging. So what do we mean by this? Those things in the middle there. By the way, this is copied and pasted from a textbook that I've taught out of. But those things are there in the middle. The 5 concepts of job characteristics model are skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. So what do we mean by that? Skill variety is simply, does it require a lot of different behaviors and skills for me. And you can see why that would be engaging. Does your job in a good way, not in an overwhelming way, kind of keep you on your toes? Or is it simply, nope, I press the Y button over and over on my computer 1,500 times a day, and that's what's required of me? Okay, there's no skill variety there. Assembly lines, right? Potentially no skill variety. And assembly lines are going to get a really bad rap here as we talk about job characteristics. Task identity. Do you get to see a project through from beginning to end? Or is it simply, hey, Dan, turn in your budgeting part of this project that we're on, budgeting part of the proposal, and you don't see any other part of it, right? And I'm the budget guy. By the way, this is a farce because I can't do budgets at all. But anyway, it's Dan, you're the budgeting guy, so just turn that in. And I just see a small piece, but I don't actually see this overall project that we're trying to accomplish. And then finally, and something we'll talk about a ton, task significance. In two ways is a task, does a job have significance? Do I see how what I'm doing contributes to the organization more largely? And then bigger than that, how are you helping see how my job is contributing to other people generally? Is the world better off because I do my job well? Is the organization better off because I do my job well? To the degree that I see that, the more likely I am to be engaged. And there are some people, again, that are so kind of burrowed in an organization that and that we don't do a good job of connecting them. We'll talk about this more, but connecting them to recipients, the beneficiaries of their services. They're kind of just like they're moles, and they don't see how they don't have that light of day, which would be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something important. Leads to that feeling. Finally, if you participated in Rick Murdoch's training 2 weeks ago, excellent training. He talked a little bit about Dan Pink, and you know the importance of autonomy. How much are you allowing of how a task gets done? How much decision-making authority are you distributing or pushing down to the people that are doing the work? To the degree that you are, the more autonomy people feel. And then finally, feedback. Now, here's what's interesting. We're going to talk about feedback in two ways. Really, interestingly enough, the more powerful characteristic for a job is feedback that comes organically. So feedback is good and we need to be giving our people more feedback. Feedback is good when you go to your employees and say, hey, you did a good job with this, right? But if I can do a job and know that I crafted that report well, or I interacted with that client in that in difficult family circumstance well, or I did a test on air quality well, or whatever it is, when that feedback is automatic, the job tends to be more engaging. Okay, but the other kind of feedback matters as well. So why is this critical? Look at the left side there. There's skill variety, identity, significance, autonomy, and feedback. Here's what happens to me when I have those things in a job. I experience meaningfulness at work. We'll talk about meaning and purpose. When there's that autonomy, I feel responsibility for the outcomes of work. I feel like an adult who's responsible for my job. And that feedback, of course, I get to know how I'm actually doing. Well, what are the outcomes? Well, one of the arguments I'm telling you is one of the outcomes is engagement. But what does this look like more specifically? The overwhelming research about job characteristics is there's high internal work motivation. We have said nothing about pay, right? High internal work motivation. You get high quality work performance, high satisfaction with the work, low absenteeism and turnover. Now, before I move on, I want to be very candid about something. I know some of you right now are saying, okay, but I can control very little of that. My sense is that there are opportunities in your organization where we can control this a little bit more. I know the federal government, for example, had a huge push with job characteristics, trying to make jobs inherently more engaging. I am fully aware, to use the old cliche, someone has to clean up after the elephants in the parade. Okay, and you're saying now, okay, how do I make that job more engaging? Well, are there tasks? Maybe cleaning up after the elephants in the parade isn't their only job. Maybe we rotate jobs, right? And so that's, or maybe you find someone who loves doing that. No, I don't know. But let me give you some tips now for how we add variety, identity, significance, and autonomy and feedback to these jobs. Okay. So skill variety. Two ways of doing this. Job rotation, which is what I talked about with the elephants in the parade. Maybe you give people in your division, in your team, whatever, opportunities to move tasks. So it's not this simply, Dan is our report producer, but maybe he for 2 weeks, he produces all the reports, but then that 2 weeks after that, he gets to deal with the customers. He goes to a public facing role, and there's that kind of rotation. Another opportunity is what's called job enlargement, where you just increase, instead of giving me that small piece of a job, and you'll see this for task identity too, you give me responsibility for an entire project A to Z to the degree that I'm comfortable with it, right? Sometimes we can do job enlargement too much and we put too much on people's shoulders. But as Jennifer said earlier, give them the support they need, etc. For task identity, this seeing the whole project beginning to end, project work tends to lead to that more than simply, here, give us this one part. Okay, so getting people involved with projects, and then related to that is breaking down silos. So we're going to put you on a cross-functional team, Joan. Instead of keeping you in your isolated role, we're going to make you part of a team that is responsible for doing this project, and together you guys will solve this problem. Instead of keeping you in these functional silos, we want members of each. We want someone from marketing, we want someone from sales, we want someone from R&D, we want some, I'm using private sector terms here, but we want someone from R&D, we want someone from operations, all on one project, and then together you will solve that problem. That gives someone that sort of identity. Task significance, we'll talk a lot about this near the end. Connect people to outcomes. What is it that why is their job is critical? Help them see that, help them see what it is that their contribution overall, what it's leading to. Not enough of this happens. It's common sense. No one here listening to my voice now saying, wow, we've never thought of that. But we don't do it enough. And second is practice narrative sharing. Meaning, when there are these successes, are you asking your people to intentionally submit positive narratives, kind of like that peer-to-peer thing that Jennifer was talking about, but even just like, hey, I had a customer come in and they said, this happened, this happened, this happened. They're so grateful for our services. That needs to be not kept to oneself and needs to be shared widely as much as possible. Okay. Autonomy. We've already talked about you increased decision-making authority, but I want to present another opportunity here for autonomy. Present problems and invite discussions. Most people, when they want to give employees more autonomy, they say, okay, here's what I need you to do, but how it gets done, it's up to you. Well, if you really want to expand autonomy, don't go to here's what needs to be done. How you do it is up to you. Go to, here is our problem. What do you think we should do? Have them decide in the first place. Right now, I think in state government, we have too many carts pulling horses. And what I mean by that is we have solutions and then that we think are cool, and then we kind of go look for problems. Problem statements are critical to our effectiveness. We all have problems with our organizations. You and I are members of organizations to solve problems. That's why our positions exist. Present problems, challenges, obstacles to people, and then say, okay, what do you think we should do about it? That's real autonomy. Okay, that's real autonomy. And then finally, feedback we talked about. There isn't always a lot that you can do about the informal feedback. That's kind of the nature of the jobs that people have. But you and I certainly can be increasing the amount of formal feedback we are giving people. Monthly, in a sit-down meeting, at the water cooler that Jennifer never goes to, right? Whatever it is, right? That you and I can do to let people know how they're doing. Hey, thank you for that. The way you wrote that project report, the data on that was perfect. Thank you. As simple as that. Okay. So you guys, very quickly, that was the job characteristics model. Okay. And it's heavy stuff. But these are simple things that you and I can do to make our jobs more inherently engaging. And the evidence, again, is overwhelming. It leads to engagement. Now, before we move on here, we've talked about employee engagement a lot. We got to get to organizational pride and purpose. But for a couple of minutes here, I want to bring on Kendra Yates, program manager, if I got that title right, at the Division of Archives. Kendra, if you'll unmute yourself, what have we missed talking about so far? We're going to take the full hour, everybody. Be prepared for that. But as far as you've seen engagement in this current work environment, what would you tell the dozens and dozens and dozens of people that are in this discussion with us that we still need to talk about?
Well, I would say that just thinking about engagement over this past year, a lot of the things that stood out to me are the ways maybe that I personally have felt less engaged while working from home. I think that performance management is a big part of it. There's just such a lack of oversight. And how do I know if my boss even cares what I'm doing? Does he know what I'm doing? Or am I just taking things off his plate so he doesn't have to worry about them? And and are my employees doing what they're supposed to be doing at home? I hired a new person, and he started July 1. And so I came into the office for 4 months every single day so that he would be able to be trained. And I had someone else come in as well, kind of rotating through, so that there was some kind of atmosphere around him. But how do I impart organizational culture to a brand new employee that doesn't have the context of previous shared history? So that's been kind of a challenge as well.
Kendra, can I ask you, is it fair to say then, in your experience, by the way, telework is not going away. I don't think we will ever see in-person work to the degree that we did prior to COVID, right? Just to be fair, is it your opinion then is that telework, distance work, whatever, requires actually more intentional management of performance because people are distant?
To keep people engaged, yes.
Yeah.
I think that as a manager, you have to decide every day to make the effort to keep people engaged with teleworking. When we're in the building together, seeing each other, it happens just serendipitously, right?
Yeah.
But with teleworking, like if you don't make that decision and find ways and kind of, I don't know, I'm still working on it, to be honest. It's still a struggle for me. The water cooler conversations, I don't think they're, one of the things that you get at water cooler conversations is a kind of informal brainstorming, discussion of problems and ideas. That how do you actually replicate the informality? Once you're in a meeting like this, you feel like it's being recorded, even if it's not being recorded.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't feel informal. And so I think that that's a loss both to the company, the organization, because you're losing out on ideas from people that maybe don't say as much in meetings or have as much of a voice. And then also like just the friendships and learning about people's personal lives in ways that they feel comfortable sharing. So I don't know. I'm still working. I like that recess. I mean, here's one thing that I was thinking about as Jennifer was sharing that about the recess time. We have various coffee breaks, and people call them different things, but they've happened organically. People have self-selected groups and set up small social breaks each, through their week. But I think the problem is that those have been self-selected. And so instead of keeping people connected, it keeps people connected with people they feel comfortable with, and the divide between those that have things in common gets bigger. And so to me, that's been something that I've kind of worried about, is that when we worked in the office, you could have fun and have discussions with people that aren't in your immediate circle. And so it just kind of greased those wheels. We've had some very tense meetings every once in a while with people that I just have hardly had any contact with. I'll go like almost a month without seeing or talking to them. And I just think, man, that was really intense. And I've wondered like how to diffuse that kind of thing. It happens much more naturally when you see each other.
I agree. And I'll be honest with you. I think, Kendra, what you're hitting on is really instructive for anybody, but for managers. And it's this idea. One of the things I've actually relished about the pandemic is, I think in one sense, I've always thought about it from performance management terms. I think it forces managers to actually manage performance rather than, are people here? Right? Because you don't get to just say, they came to work on time. Who cares? Right? But now we have to manage the right things. But what I'm hearing from you also is that we have to, kind of like what Jennifer talked about, intentionally, conscientiously manage the sociality now and go about it intentionally, because you can't just rely on the proximity anymore. You have to manufacture that proximity and say, and I one of the things I love about my team is how, we don't, most of our meetings are ad hoc still. I'll shoot out an email saying, hey, can you guys meet today at 2? And it's like 12:30. and they're like, I can. Well, I can be over, but I'll be there 15 minutes later. I love that, because it allows us to keep some of this organic nature. And we have just said that one of our calling cards has to be flexibility. in this kind of COVID age. So Kendra, thank you. That's fantastic. I appreciate that. Yeah, and now, by the way, what I will say as it relates to telework, you guys, the things here on the left that lead to employee engagement, that get us those things on the right, they still apply. How you apply them might be a little bit different. So now we need to talk about organizational pride and purpose, okay? Now, you guys have heard that this has kind of become a cliche now, the tale of the three bricklayers. Apparently, I was doing some research on this. Apparently, it might actually not just be some bogus management training thing. It might actually come from something legitimate, like actually have a historical origin. But this idea of, you walk by the three bricklayers and you ask the first one, hey, what are you doing? And kind of grumpily says, I got to lay all this brick. The second one, I'm, this is my job. I'm building this outer wall. I want to make it look good. And then the third one, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm building a cathedral for people to come and worship. And the idea is that the third one, who's engaged? Well, really, it's the third one, right? Because there's this pride in his work because he sees the purpose, or she sees the purpose to what they're doing, right? So I want you to think about this for a second. I know we're running short on time, but I want you to think about this for a second. Yeah, here I've tried to replicate with a picture. We're getting some warmer weather here. The rug will get pulled out from underneath us, of course. It's April in Utah, but warmer weather. You're at a dinner party with a friend, all COVID safe, of course. And someone says, hey, so what do you do? A very common question. What I want you to think about that right now, okay? Stranger, a friend of a friend, asks you, say, hey, so what do you do? What are your immediate feelings to that question? Not only how do you respond, but what are you feeling? I will admit to you, I've been in this circumstance, and I have said in somewhat apologetic, or embarrassment is too strong of a word, but maybe chagrined tones. Oh, I just work for the state. Okay. I hate the fact that I have responded that way, quite frankly. But how the knee-jerk feelings that you have as you think about that question right now speak a lot about the pride you have in your role, in where you work and what you do. Okay. And I'm using these two things together because so much of organizational pride, we'll break this down a little bit, but so much of it is created when I know that I have a sense of purpose. Okay. So look at this from Gallup. Again, there's our friends at Gallup, 2019. Managers at all levels, whether they're team leaders, managers of other managers, or executive C-suite folks, right, need a well-defined, well-articulated mission and purpose that everyone can easily relate back to, the work that they do every day. What's your contribution? Now, you'll notice a word that's missing from here. And that's, I don't want to poo-poo this word too much, but the word vision is not in here. I don't care, folks, if you have a vision. If you've got this grand vision about how you're going to be, fly your agency to the moon in 10 years. I care about, do your people feel a sense of purpose? Do you feel a sense of purpose and mission to what you do? Now, this is especially challenging in the public sector. What are the challenges that we see in the public sector specifically? And I don't want to get too cynical here, but we want to be realistic that we do have obstacles. We're a public punching bag, okay? Legislators, citizens, whomever, often, look, it's just still okay to make fun of government employees, okay? We have hard to measure goals. We have a lot of rules and constraints. That's the definition of government, right? And those are intentional rules and constraints. We know they're there, but sometimes they make things difficult. We have lots of external stakeholders. And that's okay too, but we have to be responsive to all of them. We don't have a lot of financial levers we can pull. We can't be like, oh, we're gonna throw a lot of money at the problem this, or we're gonna throw a lot of money at this problem, right? Then of course there's the visibility of what we do publicly. Any sort of mistake, you make the news, and those external stakeholders that we talked about are pretty unhappy. But look at this: the number one concern, and this is back in 2012. This has not changed. Okay, this has not changed. But the number one concern is the perception of government workers, because we're worried about what that's going to do to our organizational pride and our engagement levels, right? So these attacks, there's Robert Lavinia again, he's out of Wisconsin. These attacks erode employees' pride in their agencies. These attacks of being the public punching bag. A strong element of engagement is that pride. It's hard to be proud of your work when people are constantly making fun of you, when they don't appreciate what you do, when they think you're lazy, when they think you're overpaid, when you think that you're simply got a bureaucratic personality. It's hard to have that pride. These are the challenges that you and I have to overcome to foster this pride, and to give the sense of purpose, and to really get our organizational members engaged. David K. Hart, he was out of the Romney Institute at BYU, said bureaucrats, and I know we don't like that word, right? But bureaucrats must have a sacrosanct or sacred sense of mission, a heightened awareness of those moral obligations of the public service that transcend the requirements of mere functional performance. Every organization in the world everywhere is like, hey, we got to do a good job. We got to manage performance. But here he's saying, if you work, and I'm going to personalize this, if you work for the state of Utah, you better have a strong and something akin to sacred sense of the role that you play in making this a great place to live, in the service that you are providing to other people. And you have to make that clear to yourself and to others. Then we're going to start getting engaged employees. Okay. So what do you have to do? So Studs Terkel, he's a historian, you guys. How about that? Wrote a book. I don't know. I mean, look, I don't know if you can see my hand. It's this thick. You're not going to like, it's not beach reading. Okay. But he just went out and did this ethnographic study. He just interviewed people from like 450 different professions. And he just said, I want to learn about work in America. Okay. And so you can see those quotes there on the right. I love that one at the bottom. Someone he interviewed, he just said, most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirit. Jobs aren't big enough for people. Okay. So you need to give people the daily why of their work. Now, I want to make a distinction here. Giving the daily why is different than giving the why daily. What I mean by giving the daily why is the things that I have to do, the seemingly mundane, monotonous things that I have to do every day. I need to understand why those are critical and important. And by the way, if they're not, why am I doing them? You've got to help me see why they're so important. I don't know that you have to do this daily, but you've got to take the things that I do daily and I've got to see the why behind them always. Another thing is, you think about this. What do people have the most pride in very often? Usually, let's look at sports teams. Interesting study. I just shared this with some DABC folks. This is not surprising, but the amount of gear you see after a victory for your sports team in a local regional area is way higher than after a loss. People are like, yeah, I'm wearing that sweater today. Yeah, I'm putting, we need to be able to define winning for our agencies, because remember those sometimes not clear-cut goals that we have, those ambiguous goals that we often have. What does it mean when your agency is doing well? What does that mean? When is your agency winning? When is your team winning? Help me to know what that is. And let's celebrate it when we're winning. I suspect that we are winning more often than we think. And I suspect we are winning more often than we celebrate in our agencies. Related to that, you've got to articulate grand narratives. Organizations, when people have pride in their organizations, they have a sense of the history of the organization. What are those major successes and victories we've had historically? And then where are we going in the future? What are going to be the major successes and victories we're going to have in the future? And what are the narratives around them? Give me those, right? Give me those. And then also beneficiary contact. We talked a little bit about this, but it means you've got to get me as much as is reasonably possible is in contact with the people that are the recipients of the things that our agency provides. Now, in some cases, you're not going to get that, right? You're not going to get that. But for example, when I talk to JJS folks, Juvenile Justice Services, they say the most rewarding thing they get is a letter from someone who says, hey, I want you to know, basically, they don't use these terms necessarily, but they say, I've got a job, I've got a family, and they're saying, I'm a contributing member to society now, meaning that time in that JJS facility, there was reformation there. Okay, that kind of beneficiary contact really inspires your people. Okay, and again, I won't read this whole quote, but this idea of connecting people to the realities, to the benefits that their contributions, their efforts, their engagement gives to society. Look at this. The last phrase is what really bothers me. This is this kind of beneficiary contact is an organizational trait that is currently unfamiliar to many public employees. That cannot be in the state of Utah. Okay, we've got to connect people to that bigger thing that they're doing, and we've got to do it, to use Jennifer and Kendra's terms, we've got to do it intentionally. Okay, we've got to do it conscientiously and intentionally. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to add one last thing to conclude here. We've got to give people, we've got to be committed to people. Now, this came out from both of them. But I love this from Paul Farrelly, who does a lot of public sector consulting. I believe this, by the way. I don't know. We don't have time to go to debate whether this is true or not, but that agencies have an ethical or moral imperative to develop employees as human beings, not just means to an end. but these are human beings that are organizational members that you are managing, that you work with. Okay, how are they being treated? That commitment to people matters immensely. Do people feel like, again, it's kind of back to that perceived organizational support? Okay, so I'll conclude with the 4 B's of better bossing. And look, some of you are going to be like, well, this is simplistic. It is. But if you can be kind to your people, if you're a boss and you are kind, you're appreciative of people, you try to be positive, not Pollyanna-ish, but positive. And then going back to Rick's webinar from last week, and you're worthy of their trust. They know that your intentions for them are good. You're going to be an effective boss. You're going to be in a position to help them feel engaged. So there's our process, you guys. There on the left, those things, that is a secret sauce to how we get employee engagement, more motivation and commitment. And there on the right is what we get in return. So I'm absolutely convinced that we can see more engagement in our agencies. I'm absolutely convinced that's how we turn our agencies around in the state of Utah. We're doing good things, amazing things already, but we can always do better, because what we do is so important that we need to be striving to be better all the time. Employee engagement is that essence. It is that end goal of leadership. That's what we want, is employee engagement. Okay. So again, thanks everybody. We're going to send you an evaluation. We're going to send you a link to the recording, and we're going to send a sign up again for the webinar from Kevin Miller 2 weeks from now. Okay. And by the way, if you have any questions or anything, you can find me. Of course, we're all in the same email system. Please reach out. Thank you to everyone, but thank you to Jennifer and Kendra for their insights, their wisdom that they shared with us. And I'll stick on for a bit if anybody has any questions. But if not, thanks everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.